first step that I'm going to do is I'm going to take this empty scene file and I'm going to go File, Save Scene As. Haven't done anything. There's nothing in here. And I'm just going to call it Latour David BB V01. That way, the second I go Control S to save my scene, it's going to save it with the correct name, and so I can find it later. Now, I need the character rig that I'm going to be working with. Let me show you where you get that file. So this is in the class page on FOL. Under Content, I go to Rigs, and there is the Mooly Ball V1.3. I'm going to download that file. And I actually want to take it into my Documents, Maya, Projects, Default, and I want to put it in this very first folder, Asset. The Assets folder in Maya is where we keep things that we use over and over and over again. The assets themselves, we don't animate on these things. They just sit in that folder and we reference them into scenes as we need to use them. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say File, Create Reference. And this is important. I'm not going to load that character rig into my scene. I'm just going to create a little flag in my scene that says, hey, every time you open up, go and get this character rig and bring it in here. Like this, and it pulls up this file browser. It looks just very much like an open situation, except I'm going to go to Assets and I'm going to click on the Mooly Ball and say Reference. Now, I'm saying under Namespace, use namespaces and use this selected namespace as the parent capital A, and I'll show you why. Reference. And now if I hit A to frame everything in the scene, there is the Mooly Ball. If I hit the 6 key that says, hey, show me textures. Now, if I go here, File, Reference Editor, this shows me every little flag in the scene to bring stuff in. In this case, there's only one flag. It's the Mooly Ball. And there's that namespace A that I referenced in. And the reason this is important is because when I select an object on the Mooly Ball, like for example, this main controller, you'll see it adds this little A : main control. And that's so that I can have multiple copies of this Mooly Ball. Each of the copies are distinguished from each other by this prefix. If I want to create another Mooly Ball, I just go ahead and I say create a reference, or I click on a reference that's already in the scene and I click this duplicate reference. I need 2 more Mooly Balls. So I'm going to say, give me 1, give me 2. So now I've got 2 more Mooly Balls in the scene. And this one's called A. I'm going to call this next one B, enter, and I'm going to call the third one C, like that. And I'm just typing it and changing the names. Now, you can't see it because they're literally one on top of the other. So I'm just going to move one over to the side, one over the side like that. And there's my 3 Mooly Balls. And because they're referenced, I can uncheck those and unload them from the scene because I'm like, I don't really want to look at them right now. I check and they come back in. Now on small rigs like this, it goes very quickly. As you get larger, more elaborate rigs, it's sometimes helpful, especially if your computer's struggling, to unload the references you're not looking at right now and only load the reference that you're actually animating on. So it helps you organize yourself. And the other important thing about referencing is when I select objects and I hit delete, it'll send me this warning saying, hey, you can't delete that because this is a referenced object, which means it's read-only. You can look at it, you can manipulate it, you can set keys on it, but you're not allowed to delete it or rearrange the hierarchy or anything like that. And so it prevents me from accidentally breaking the rig. So I'm going to unload these 2 characters. I'm going to take this first Mooly Ball and I'm just going to set it at the center here. And I'm going to go Panel, Orthographic, Side. This is the view that I'm going to be creating my bouncing ball assignment from. And I'm going to go File, Save Scene because I've loaded my references in. And in fact, I could even go Save Scene As, and I'm going to increment this to V. Now you can see I've already got a copy there like that. So I'm just going to call it 3 like that. Save As. Okay. Now the Mooly Ball rig, one of the things that we're going to want to do is get rid of that tail. See, if you select the main controller here, if I click on the name Show Tail and I set that to 0, the tail disappears. Or I can click on the name itself and I can middle mouse drag back and forth in my viewport, and that will toggle the tail on. And it's the same when I get to the point where I want to start doing squash and stretch in the ball. Click on the name, show squash, middle mouse drag back and forth. And you can't see it from this angle very well, but I'm going to go perspective here for a second. There's that squash and stretch controller. I'm going to go ahead back to my orthographic view here. So orthographic side view, and I'm going to create my environment. Create polygon primitive, and I'm just going to use basic cubes to create my environment. So I'm going to tear off this menu because I want to create a few cubes. And so I can just click cube and there's a cube that is created. Now I can use R to scale it. And I can scale this by selecting one axis or another and changing its shape. So I'm gonna put sort of a big, long, flat platform here at the bottom of the screen for sort of the ground plane. Now I'm going to make another polygon cube. I'm just going to click cube again, and there's this new cube, W to move. And I'm going to go R to scale, and I click in the center there to scale it wholesale. And I'm going to make another cube and just sort of set it like that. There. Now it's useful as I'm creating this environment to turn on my resolution gate, because that shows me the aspect ratio of my scene as I'm actually going to be animating it. So I can sort of compose my scene based on that staging. So I'm going to put a platform there. And rather than doing create polygon primitive cube, I can also just duplicate a cube. So I click on a cube and I do Ctrl D, and it makes a copy of that cube. And then I can move it to a new location, and I can scale that. I'm going to make a little platform here. Let's see, like this. And then I'm going to make Control D, another platform like this. And I'm going to use the E key to rotate it and place it like this. There we go. Because I'm thinking I'm going to have my ball start up here. It's going to bounce and bounce and then bounce and bounce off and then hopefully hit this thing. So I'm going to move this down just a little bit like that so that there's no chance it could miss. It's going to hit this thing and then go in the other direction. So it'll be kind of a fun, interesting thing. I'm going to grab these three pieces here together. I'm just doing left mouse button and shift click to select all three of them together, and I'm just going to move them all over a bit this way. Just give myself a little bit of room up here for the ball to start like that. Big bounce. I want to sort of land in there, bounce, bounce like that, up there, and then down like that. I think I'll take this platform, shorten it a bit. Just I'm trying to imagine sort of where this ball would go. So I have everything set up the way I'd like it. Set this about a 45-degree angle. And you know what? I'm going to actually set it to exactly 45 degrees like that. There we go. Now, this is going to be my rubbery bouncing ball. And one of the things that I want to do is sort of establish some properties of this rubber ball. I'm going to say that every time this ball bounces, it loses about a third of its energy. So it's pretty springy. For the assignment description, this scene exactly 6 seconds long, so 144 frames at 24 frames a second. So I'm going to go down here and set my time slider to 144 like this, and I'm going to set the end frame 144 like this. The other part of this puzzle that I probably should have been doing is I should have just drawn out on a piece of paper where each ball was going to go, what order they're going to start in, sort of think things through for myself before I actually start messing around in Maya, and it goes much quicker. Now that I've gotten some progress here, I'm going to go File, Save Scene As, and I'm going to increment it up. 04. So the way we set keys on an object is we select it and we hit the S key. And you'll see down here on the timeline when I do that, a little red hash mark will show up saying, hey, you have recorded the position of this object at this time. So if I hit S to key, you'll see over in the channel box, the translate and rotate channels will suddenly turn red. You'll see the little hash mark on the timeline here saying that there's a key at frame 1 on that object. So I hit S to key, boom, and there's that little hash mark. Channels turn red. If I click elsewhere on the timeline, you'll see the channels are pink, indicating, hey, there's some animation somewhere, but it's red when you click on the frame where the key is. So the channel box gives you a little bit of visual feedback of, hey, you've got a key right here. Now, I don't actually need to animate the rotations. I'm not going to be spinning this ball. So if I click on the names of those channels, left mouse button, click and drag, and then right click, I can go delete select and just say, hey, get rid of those. And in fact, the translate X, that's the axis that's moving towards us and away from us in this angle. I'm not actually animating on that, so I can go ahead and say delete selected on that as well. There are only two channels I'm actually working with. The Y, which is the up and down, and the Z, which is the side to side from this view. Now, over here on the lower right-hand corner, there's a couple of buttons that are going to be pretty important for me. The first is this auto keyframe. If I move something, I want to key it. So I'm going to keep that turned on so that if I go to another frame, say frame 20, and I say, okay, at frame 20, I want the character to be here. And the second I release my left mouse button, boom, you see these channels turn red. You see a little hash mark show up here saying, hey, I've set a key there. So immediately If I manipulate something, it sets a key. And you'll see it only sets the keys on the channels that I've actually keyed. So translate X, rotate Y, X, Y, Z, all of these channels, because I deleted that animation there, it's like, well, you don't have keys there, so I'm not going to set keys on those channels. So it keeps things nice and tidy. So I got a key at frame 1, I've got a key at frame 20, and if I click on the left mouse button, click and drag, you'll see that object slide over from 0 to 20 to that position. So already I'm starting to animate. Now the other thing that I'm going to click on is this little gear chasing the little person there. I'm going to click that, and that's going to bring up this window, animation preferences time slider. There are a couple of things I want to make sure that I have set. And so I'm going to say playback speed. I want to make sure it's not set to play every frame, which is what Maya does by default. I want to set it to 24 FPS times 1. Okay, so that way I know I'm going to see my animation playback in real-time speed. And there are a few other things that as we go further along, for example, undos, I want to make sure that's on and infinite so I can go Ctrl Z and back up as far as I want. But there's tons of stuff here in the preferences that sort of impact the way Maya functions, and that'll show you all your preferences. I've got a key set. I'm literally animating. Now, it would be nice to see a little bit more clearly how this ball is moving, but I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to just sort of randomly set in time the places that I want this ball to be. So I want him to sort of bounce down here, then I want him to bounce like that, and then I want to bounce down here like that. And I'm just sort of setting these keys based on nothing in particular, I'm just going down the timeline. And let's see, and then it'll sort of bounce like this, and then bounce down here like that, and then up like that. So I'm just left mouse button clicking and dragging, then he'll hit that platform, and I'm assuming, he goes like this and bounces, and he wants to go this way, but the angle of the platform sends him that way instead, and so so he would deflect off kind of on a more flat trajectory like that, and this will be fun. I have no idea how this is going to work. He'd probably like bounce like that, hit there, and then back down like that, and then like that. Now, your balls don't have to come to a stop at the end of the scene. They can still be in motion. So that's as far as I've gotten. He's going to sort of go boing, 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 bounce up, boing, like that. That's my best guess so far of what I think is going to happen. Now, I'm going to turn on a tool that allows me to sort of see the motion of the character as a visual representation, the path that they're taking. And so with the control selected, that main control, and you can see here, every time I click on that main control, I see all of my keys show up on the timeline. If I click off of it, well, I have nothing selected, so it doesn't show me anything. Whatever you have selected is where you see information. So if I select it, I can see the keys on the timeline. I can see the channel box, the value of it as I'm moving along. So what you have selected is really important in Maya. And so in this case, I'm going to click that main controller, and I can see the keys along the timeline. I can see the data in the channel box showing what the values at those particular times are. And in fact, I can step back and forth to my keys. Down on your keyboard, you'll see the comma and the period key. That is the greater than, less than symbol. So the arrow like that is less than. This one is greater than. It's two little math symbols. They look kind of like arrows. And in fact, if you have an object selected and there are keys on it, and you use the greater than symbol, the arrow going to the right, it will step to the next key on that object, like this. If you use the less than, it'll step to the previous key. So you can sort of quickly step through your keys. Yeah, Lily, you got a question?
If you make a key and you want to like move it down to make it later, can you do that?
Absolutely. And in fact, you're going to see me doing that a whole bunch. Good question. Very intuitive jump forward. Yeah, in fact, these keys on the timeline, if I decide I want them someplace else, all I have to do is I hold down the Shift key, and then I left mouse button click on my timeline, and I've selected that key. Now, this is important. and really easy to get wrong. The order that I release is really important. If I release the left mouse button first and then the shift key, it stays selected. But if I hold down shift, left mouse button click, and I'm left mouse button clicking and holding, and I release the shift key, when I release my left mouse button, it deselects. So it's really important to hold down the shift key, hold down left mouse button, and you can select a region or you can select a specific spot. Just make sure that you keep the shift key held until you release your left mouse button to keep that stuff selected. But that allows me, if I select a key, for example, and I'm going to select around it, so I've just got this key here. Now I can middle mouse click right here in the center and hold that, and I can drag that key back and forth in time. And so if I select this key, middle mouse click and drag, I can do that. Now, it is important to note that when I select a region, you'll see there's a yellow arrow here, a yellow arrow here, and these two yellow arrows here. Middle mouse clicking on those two yellow arrows moves back and forth. Middle mouse clicking on one of these end arrows scales that region. And the reason you don't want to do that is now if I use my step to the next key, I've set that key at 17.88, a non-whole number. And that's not what I want to do. Control Z, I'm going to undo that. So make sure as you're moving keys around, you're very careful to sort of make sure you move by those middle keys. So it's moving even numbers of frames. Now, if you end up that you think you might have set a bunch of keys, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to take a whole bunch of keys. I'm going to scale a little bit. And you're going along, you're like, oh no, I've set a whole bunch of keys to non-integer or non-whole frames. I'm just going to double click on the timeline, which is a shortcut for sort of select everything. And then I'm right click and I'm going to go snap. And that just says, hey, take every key on this object on the timeline and try and put it on a whole number, snap. And so now if I step along here, you can see all my keys are on whole frames again. Now that only works if there's enough room for all the keys to find a spot. It's sort of like musical chairs. Everybody shifts around until they can find a spot. If you have a bunch of keys that are less than one frame apart all together on the timeline and you say snap, they'll be like, there are not enough chairs for us. And it'll send up a warning saying, hey, some of the keys I couldn't snap for you. So it's really important to make sure that you try to avoid setting those non-whole keyframes because then things start to behave in a very unpredictable way. It's a little bit annoying to try and sort out, but it's not the end of the world. If you find yourself in that situation, you can't figure it out, come see me during office hours and I'll help you. So I've got some keys. I've got them on the timeline, and I'm going to go ahead and open up the graph editor, which is going to show me curves representing the movement of this object. So I'm going to go like this, window, animation, graph editor, and you'll see two curves. There's the translate Y, which represents the up and down of the character, and there's the translate Z, which represents the side-to-side movement of the character. And so if I look at this curve, and it's kind of like imagining a slope that you're sliding down on a toboggan, or if you've never lived in a place with snow, imagine a hill and you're on your bicycle or you're on a cart with wheels. And as you get steeper, you go faster. And as you get shallower, you go slower. If you're flat, you're standing still. So this means it's going down, starts speeding up, going faster, 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 and then it starts to slow down a little bit here, and then it's at a stop here, and now it's starting to slowly go in the opposite direction, and then it's starting to slow down here, and then this movement is faster, and this movement is faster because these are steeper. This movement is slower because it's shallower. And so this gives you a sense, just visually looking at it, at the speed of movement. This here, you can see it's moving from side to side. It starts slowly at first and speeds up, and it's going quicker here, and then it slows down a little bit, but it's still always going in the same direction roughly. And here it changes direction. It starts to go in the other direction. So this here, it's going from left to right, and then it goes from right to left. So that's what these curves represent. It's the movement of this object that I have selected through space. Up and down, side to side, like that. And so it's kind of handy because it gives me a visual representation. I can see, for example, oh, you know, the ball is going up in the air really slowly and then it comes down really quickly. So I bet you this key here, I probably want to do something more like this. so that the speed going up and the speed going down is roughly the same. And I want each of these bounces to sort of, the physical property of the ball doesn't change and gravity doesn't change. So it's going to behave the same every time. It means that each of these bounces will look like sort of a miniature mirror of itself. Now, I also know, I'd already said the rules of this ball is that when it falls, it loses about a third of its energy. So here I can see it falls and it looks like it only bounces about 1/3 as high, and I want it 2/3. So this key here, I actually want way up here. So I'm going to left mouse button click that key, and I'm going to middle mouse drag it up like that. So it's about 2/3 the height. And then this key here should be 2/3 the height of this one. So I'm going to go here like this and say, okay, so you should be 2/3 this height. And I'm going to hold down Shift and middle mouse click to drag it up and down. Middle mouse click when I select a key, so left mouse button click to select a key, or left mouse button click and drag to select a region of keys. Middle mouse moves that key, and I can move it side to side or up and down. But if I want to just move it up and down or just side to side, I hold down the Shift key, and when I click middle mouse, you'll see my cursor does a little question mark saying, well, which way do you want to move, Dave? And if I move up and down, then any side to side movement doesn't change it. So if I want to change the value, but not the frame that it happens at, I use that Shift key to control it. Okay, so going along here, again, just following that rule of for each bounce, it loses a third of its energy. So here it bounces from here to here, which means 2/3 be like about there. Here it bounces from this height to that height. Now, this here, it doesn't look like where I want that key, so I'm going to grab that because each bounce I want to sort of roughly the same shape. You can see these bounces here. This one is a little steep, so I'm going to go ahead and move those so they look kind of similar. This one here, and this is where the graph curve is really handy. As you can see, it allows me to kind of visually see how the up and down behaves, like see how this one's really slow. And so I'm going to say, okay, well, then by moving your keys together, I'm going to speed it up there so we can see sort of that similar angle. And then this one here, I'm selecting a region, moving, that's a similar angle. And then like this, that's a similar angle. So there you can see similar angle, similar. That means the speed that it goes up and down is consistent because gravity doesn't change. The physical properties of the ball don't change. So once I've established sort of what it should look like when it's bouncing, that's going to be consistent. So like that, and then so here it's going down, and then the next bounce I want to be sort of 2/3, and so I'm going to move these back again like this, like that. This one 2/3. That's about 2/3, and then oh, it's hitting the platform. So yeah, here we go like this. I'm going to go move this back like that, and then so now this is interesting. This is the height of the bounce. So 2/3 of that height. Oops. Oops. Trying to grab my key there. Oh, wrong key. This gun. Oh, interesting. Come here, you. Oh, I think I've moved keys off whole frames. So let's just go snap. There we go. There we go. That's better. So this key should be 2/3, be like roughly that height. Then this bounce drops that far, which means 2/3 would be up here. But in this case, I seem to recall, yeah, I was actually colliding with this here. So there's more energy, but it gets taken away and sends it back in the other direction. So this is kind of a tricky one because I'm hitting the top. Where he'd like to go would be about, based on 2/3 would be here, which means the next bounce would be about here. But because he collides with that platform, I'm going to push him down here, and just remember that the energy would have sent him much higher like that. So I'm going to do that. And then let's see here. Now, I wouldn't recommend these kinds of complex interactions for yourself. This is sort of a more advanced thing, but this gives you an idea of what I'd be doing. Now, There are a couple of things that I need to do to get this bouncing ball looking correct. The first is at the bottom of these bounces, the ball slows down at the tops of the bounces, but when it hits the ground, it's moving very quickly and it immediately recoils very quickly. And so to get the right shape, these bottom keys, I'm selecting them all. So I'm just doing Shift and left mouse button, click and drag. Whoops, try this again. Whoops, U, moving too quickly there. Oh, sorry. Moving too quick for Maya. There we go. So there's all of my bottom keys. I'm going to go here and say break tangents. And what that allows me to do is I can move the handles separately on all of those keys like that. So like that, like that, and like that, like that, like that, that. Oops, there we go. Like that, like that. Get those nice parabola shapes, those curving arcs where the ball speeds up as it's coming towards the ground. It recoils really quickly, but when it gets to the apex of the bounce, the top of the bounce here, it slows down as gravity takes over and sends it back in the other direction. And this apex key here, it looks like it needs to be just a little bit over, one frame over. There we go. And then these keys here, this key here, I want that parabola a little bit more rounded. Same thing here, this parabola just a little bit more rounded. You can see each of those bounces look like they're sort of part of the same family. They all share similarity in terms of the shape, the way they look, because the physical properties involved don't change. The mass of the ball, gravity, those are constants. How springy the ball is, that's a constant. It doesn't change. And so I want the properties of its behavior to look consistent. That's a warning to me. I have my autosave set to, I think 20 minutes. So as soon as I see that, it tells me I've been working for 20 minutes without saving. And generally, I always say, you don't want to work any longer than you want to repeat that same work without saving. So 20 minutes, that's more than I want to repeat. I'm going to go ahead and say File, Save Scene. And actually, I could go File, Save Scene As and increment it, so each step of the progress. Now, the other thing that I want is I want this translate Z. It shouldn't be speeding up or slowing down. In fact, it should be linear. So I'm just going to go like this and say linear, because there's no jetpack on this bouncing ball. It's not going to speed up or slow down. It's just going to move at a consistent speed. And so I shouldn't have it going faster here and slower there. So I'm going to say, okay, well, you should be sort of more like this, and you should be more like this. Now, there are particular spots that I need to bounce. So I'm going to make sure that I stay within those ranges. But for example, these two here, I can pull them up. And then this moment here, let's see, where are you? Okay, so you're in the air. I don't need a key when he's in the air. It's only where the character touches the ground that I need those translate Z keys. So wherever there's an apex, like here, the character is at the apex there, I don't actually need a key on translate Z. And it's only when the character touches that I need to have a translate Z key. Here, touching, so that there, I'm going to just go like this. Let me move that down a little bit. Now the fixed point is this moment here where he touches this platform. I have to hit that target. So everything I'm doing is about matching that position. So I'm just going to try and make the speed consistent. So apex key, don't need that. And so I'm just left mouse button and hitting the delete key to delete those keys at the apex. So it's only where the character's touching. So let's go like this. A to frame all, I can go ahead, delete that, just let it carry at a consistent speed like this. And you know what, delete that and delete that. You know what, I can get rid of all of them and just sort of let it bounce where it needs to bounce. And let's see, make sure I haven't created any intersections with my environment. So it's coming, bouncing, coming down for landing, bounce, 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 bounce. There we go. And now this heading back in the other direction. This guy here, I'm going to say linear for you too. In fact, all these keys, linear. And doing boink. And so I need him to be there to hit that platform. So I'm just going to delete that, delete that, delete that. There we go. And so I've got some more animation that I can do, but let's see how this looks. I'm going to hit play. Boing, 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 boing. There we go. Now, I want a tool that allows me to see the movement of the character whilst I'm working. During this whole time, I could actually turn on this tool under the animation menu called Visualize, create editable motion trail. And that will create a curve that shows the path of my character's movement. And as I make changes to my animation, that curve will update. And so this is a really handy tool for letting me see the movement of my character. And in fact, there's a couple of other little things on that that are helpful. So I'm going to go here, window, outliner. This shows me every physical thing in the scene. There's all the cubes that I created. There's my character rig. There is the motion trail. So if I click on that motion trail and I hit Control A to pull up my attribute editor, I can see all the properties of that motion trail. And one of the ones that I'm particularly interested in is this one that says show frame crosses. And that puts a little cross on every single frame so I can see the spacing of my character. I'm gonna make that a little brighter because it's kind of hard to see. So I'm gonna up the saturation like this. There we go. And in fact, I'm gonna take the frame cross size and just make it a teensy bit bigger as well so it's easier to see. There we go. And you can even turn on show frame cross numbers so you can literally see on a frame by frame basis. Oh, this is where it is at frame 7. This is where it is at frame 10. I don't need that kind of granularity of information. I just want to see the spacing because truthfully, what I'm interested in is the idea that I can see the spacing down here is big, meaning going faster, and the spacing up at the top gets closer together, which means the ball is moving slower. Easing in and easing out of the apex, moving fast at the bottom, that's going to create the illusion that this thing has the physical properties of a rubber bouncy ball. Now, when it's time for me to play blast this and hand it in, I'm going to go to the Viewport menu, Show. And if I click that there, you'll see, well, it's checked everything. Every single type of object that Maya has, it's going to be visible here. I'm going to tear off that menu for a second. And I'm going to say, hey, how about we don't show anything? Because the only things I actually want to show are the polygons and the NURBS surfaces, those two types of surfaces. Those are the things that I'm actually interested in play blasting. And then while I'm working, I'll turn on NURBS curves, I'll turn on motion trails so I can see those tools as I need them. Whenever I'm going to play blast, I'm going to turn those off. And fun sort of pro tip, you can actually set it up so that your play blast display overrides the viewport settings. And so when you do play blasting, and I'm going to tear that off, you can say, hey, when I play blast, I just want to see the surfaces and the polygons don't show the motion trails. And in fact, I can even turn off that grid. And override viewport says, hey, regardless of what I have whilst I'm working, anytime I go to play blast, this is what I want you to show, just surfaces and polygons. And now watch what happens without me having to toggle anything. If I go here and I'm going to hide my resolution gate, this resolution gate shows me the framing of my scene. So here I'm going to move it a teensy bit closer like this, sort of compose my scene, because you can see there's nothing really happening over here, so I don't need to see that. Okay, I'm happy with the composition. I'm going to go ahead and lock my camera so I can't accidentally move my camera. And I'm going to right click and it pulls up the Playblast menu, and I click on the little option box. And here I'm going to say QuickTime, animation encoding, 100% quality. I want from render settings, frame padding 2 is fine. I want to save to file so I actually get a physical file, and I'm going to call it Latour underscore David underscore BB for bouncing ball. That's where I want it to be called. Everything else is fine. So you can see I have motion trails visible. I have NURBS curves visible, but when I hit play blast, it will hide those things. Now I'm going to turn off my resolution gate because I don't want that visible. I'm going to go play blast. And I have render off screen turned on so that it doesn't even show. And then there we go. There's my bouncing ball, all nice and ready to hand in. And hopefully the physics feels pretty believable. Truthfully, if you're consistent with your rules, each time it bounces, it loses the same amount of energy. If you break those tangent handles at the bottom and shape your curve so you get those nice parabolas, all of that, it's going to be very easy. So I've got my my rubber ball here bouncing along, and I got most of the way, and then with my timing changes, I needed to finish that animation. Easy enough to do, and in fact, I can do this in the graph editor because once I've established sort of the movement, the behavior of the character, it's very easy to intuit what's going to happen next. So for example, if I go down here, you can see he wanted to go this high and deflected off the bottom, and so there was that retained energy, and then 2/3 of that was there, and that's sort of how I made that decision about where that bounce would happen. So I just go ahead and I say, well, on the movement from side to side, well, it would just continue at that pace. So I'm just going to go ahead and just set a key on these two channels here, S key, and then I can easily move those keys where they should be. So this one here, I want to say is linear, and I go like this, and I say, okay, well, he would just continue at that same pace, and then of course this here would head towards the ground like that. And I was doing my manipulation by breaking tangent handles, but there's another way you can manipulate your curves to get the shapes that you want. And I do that by going, I guess I'm going to say curves weighted tangents. And you'll see that the handles on these keys change from triangles to squares. Now the curve shape doesn't change, but what does change is now I can, for example, take this handle here and I can pull it out and you'll see that curve shape change. And as I was saying before about the, hang on a sec here, let me go into my 3D menu just so it's a little easier to see what's going on. As I manipulate those keys, you'll see those frame crosses start to shift around in terms of where they are. And that's what I was talking about as far as being able to kind of adjust those positions. So here I'm going to grab that handle and watch as I pull that handle in and out. See how the curve not only changes shape, but those frame crosses, you can see as I pull it out wider, they get more gathered up here. As I pull it and it's more triangular, they get more evenly spaced. And so your mileage may vary. I don't actually use weighted tangents that much, not because they're not great, but just because they didn't exist when I first started animating in 3D. And so I'm accustomed to thinking in terms of just manipulating tangent handles, adding more keys to get particular results I want. But weighted tangents are very powerful because you can do really complex things with very few keys, but your mileage may vary. And if I take this tangent handle and I move it in, you can see you get almost the same result as if you broke that tangent handle. However, it's really super annoyingly difficult once you do this to actually select those tangent handles and pull them back out again. So I personally, I don't recommend doing that because that you can end up with like, I don't know, they're in there somewhere and I can't quite get a hold of it. It's like tying a knot in a string that you can't get undone. So for me, I go ahead and under curves, weighted tangents, I always look for it under tangents because I'm thinking, well, it's about tangents, right? But no, it's actually under the curves, non-weighted tangents. And I think part of the reason for that is because you can't sort of selectively say, hey, make this tangent weighted, this one not weighted, and mix the curve type. It's either the entire curve is weighted tangents or it's not. So I'm going to go ahead, break that tangent handle there, pull it up, get that parabola shape that I want for that bounce. And I just sort of follow along with the physics that I've established to determine where the ball goes next. And truthfully, that's one of the challenges with this assignment is without a bit of planning, it's very easy to sort of paint yourself in a corner because you establish the physical properties of the ball. It's just going to behave as it behaves the entire time. So how it interacts with surface, what it collides with is kind of a product of its physical properties. That's why doing a quick little doodle and doing a bit of planning is actually really helpful for this assignment. I'm going to go back to my orthographic side view here. I can actually just tap my space bar and tap my space bar again, and there I am back to my side view. I'm going to turn off that motion trail just for now because it's actually not very instructive for me at the moment. And oh, I see what's going on. Let me go show. I've buried my character in the ground here. You can see here I moved that key too low. One of the things you'll notice, window, animation editor, graph editor, that's kind of annoying to go to each time. So if I hold down Ctrl Shift and left mouse button click on a menu item, you'll see it makes that button appear on whatever your active shelf is. And so instead of digging through the menu, I can just go click and pull up that graph curve. So here we go. I'm just going to go here like this, pull that key up out of the ground so that my character is on the surface now. I'm going to do a couple more keys here. And let's see, I'm assuming he's going to sort of bounce something like that, something like that. Grab that translate Y, frame it up. Again, it's sort of just following along with the physical properties of the character and being consistent. So let's see here. Yeah, I think that key would be, and a bounce along level ground. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Same number of frames. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm gonna, well, you know what? 3. Fewer frames, shorter height. It's gonna lose a third of its height. 1, 2, 3. This would be coming back down to the ground. And there, like that. Break that tangent handle like this. So 1, 2, 3, up. 1, 2, 3, down, like that. Break that tangent handle. And so there's my bouncing ball animation. Looks like it's going to sort of come bump up against that curve there. Let me see here. These linear, don't need this apex key here. Only need keys on the translate Z. I only need keys where it's touching the ground. So there, key selected. So if I select just the channel name and hit S, it'll only key that channel. Kind of a useful thing if you're trying to set a key just on a specific channel. And then this here, again, to get a little, so bounce, 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 and then going along, so another bounce here. Let's see, best key, oops, S key there, delete that key. You can left mouse button click on the timeline, or just click anywhere on the timeline, right click and go delete, and it'll delete that key at that frame. If you've got a key, you're sort of like, I don't want that key. Key selected, there we go. Frame that up, pull this up. Now this is interesting. I've got a sort of an uneven number of frames for this bounce because I've got 1, 2 up and then 1, 2, 3 down. So I'm going to go like this because sometimes maybe you have a bounce that's an uneven number of frames. I'm just going to go like this. So the apex is on the half frame. So it's 2.5 frames to the top, 2.5 frames to the bottom. Because if it's bouncing on a level surface, the physical properties of the ball don't change on either half of the bounce, right? It's going to be the same going up as it is coming down. And so that'll give me a bounce of 5 frames like that. And then that takes me right to the end of the scene. And let me just adjust that up just a little bit. Like that, so he's just out of the ground. Grab the translate Z here like this. Let's see, framing that up, you can see he speeds up and slows down just a teensy bit. So I'm just going to go like this and like this, like that. There, that's better. That's better. So touch, touch. Don't need that key there. That's in the air. There we go, like that. And in fact, I don't really need these keys here. I just need to know where he's going to end up. He's going to bounce consistently at that speed all along there like that. And that'll take me right to the end of the animation. So here we go. So there's that rubber ball animation first. I'm just going to hit play, and my playback should be in real time. There we go. All right. Yeah. Not bad for a first pass. So I'm going to go ahead and say, fine, I'm happy with that rubber ball. I'm going to go to my reference editor here, and I'm going to say, okay, unload that rubber ball. Let's bring in the next ball, and I'm going to animate the heavy ball. And I'm going to show how that heavy ball differs from the bouncing rubber ball. Now, in this case, I'm going to treat each ball like it's on a separate plane, that they're not interacting with each other, that they'll pass through each other if they happen to run each other. So I don't have to worry about the choreography of those balls. So I'm going to take my heavy ball. I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to start it, I don't know, up here. And it's just going to randomly launch, hit, bounce, bounce like that, something like that. And I'm going to animate it starting on frame 25. Actually, let me bring my rubber ball for a second, because I don't want it to start when my audience is looking. So you know what? When this ball goes up and my audience eye is following it, this ball will start. So I'll say he starts at like frame 50. Yeah, you know what? That'll be where I start that animation. So I'm going to go ahead, select those two channels, S to key. That's all I needed to see from the rubber ball, so I can get rid of him. And I'm going to say I want him, and I'm not worrying about timing right now. I'm just going to say, okay, he's going to start up. He's going to hit like there. Then he's going to bounce somewhere around there. Then he's going to land on the ground there like that. Then there. Then there. And you can see already one of the things that I'm doing with this heavy ball is I am having it lose a lot more energy for each time it bounces. That it drops from a fairly significant height and it only bounces up a fraction of that height, even though it, and I'm going to even go lower than that. I'm going to say like there, and I'm going to pull it in closer like there, and then here and there like that. So it's sort of very high up, next key, next key, next key, next key, like that. The idea here is that the ball is a rigid, heavy object with tons of mass. It's going to actually crush and deform the surface that it's falling on, and a bunch of that energy is going to go into the surface. However, it has a lot of mass, which means its side-to-side movement, it's just going to keep rolling. It's going to take a long time for that thing to come to a stop. And so it'll roll, hit this side, bounce off it, send some of the energy into there, and then roll back the other way. And it'll probably just keep rolling until it gets, I don't know, to about here at the very end of the scene. Maybe further, I'm not sure. Maybe like there. So it's like bounce, bounce, bounce. Now, similar to the rubber ball, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to manipulate some of the tangent handles to get those arc shapes. And this time I'm going to go visualize, create editable motion trail to create that motion trail right away. So I can sort of, as I manipulate my curves, I can see that happening. I'm going to go ahead in the outliner, window, outliner, and I'm going to do Ctrl Shift, left mouse button click. So there I've got a button to pull up my outliner, a button to pull up my thing. And in fact, you know what? I don't use it often, but my reference editor, I'm going to go Control and Shift, File, Reference Editor. I'm going to have my reference editor up here as well, so that I can go like this and just pull up my reference editor and get it out. So anytime I find myself clicking through a menu a bunch of times, I'm going to make a shelf button really quickly for it. And I'll delete those later. They're just temporary little tools for myself while I'm working. So I'm going to go ahead, pull up my outliner here, and I'm going to click on this motion trail handle for this one. So this is the motion trail for the rubber ball, and I can even rename that motion trail. I can say rubber ball, like that. And this one I'm going to call heavy ball, just so I can keep track of which motion trail relates to which character. Now, motion trails like this are kind of like Kleenex. You use them, you blow your nose, you throw them in the garbage. You can always get more if you need it. Motion trails the same way. The second I'm not really actively using it, or I feel like I'm done, I'll delete it, and then I can always recreate it if I need to. But for now, I'm just going to label those so it's easy for me to switch back and forth between. So here's my heavy ball starting at frame 50, hits there, does a short little bounce, hits there, short little bounce. And so you can see it loses like 1/6 of the height of the bounce. So lots of energy. But I'm still going to go ahead and in the graph editor here, I'm going to say, okay, translate Y, break that tangent handle there, break that tangent handle there, break that tangent handle there, each of those tangent handles. The translate Z, I know I'm going to be linear. I'll adjust the position of those curves because, again, the side-to-side movement remains fairly consistent, that the character doesn't speed up or slow down in their side-to-side movement. And in fact, the heavy ball has a ton of inertia, and so it's even less inclined to speed up or slow down easily, which means If it's moving at this speed, it's going to stay moving at that speed. And in fact, cheeky little trick, I'm just going to go like this, delete all those keys here, right up to the moment that the character hits that wall and deflects in the other direction. And that way it guarantees that the side-to-side movement is a steady rate of speed, because I don't need any of those other keys. And so now I'm doing is interacting with the translate Y. So let's go ahead, grab this translate Y, and I'm going to pull this handle up. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do here, and this is the difference between reality and audience expectation. If you took two objects and dropped them, their rate of fall would be fairly similar, even though one could have a ton of mass and one could have much less mass. Gravity is pulling on a constant, but truthfully, their fall would be very similar. However, I'm going to match audience expectation. The heavy ball, I'm going to depict its resistance to change as being so high that when I let go of it, it just kind of hangs in space for a second while the rubber ball takes off a little bit more quickly. So I'm going to make those apexes a little more ease in, ease out kind of thing. That they're a little bit more flat and round at the top, tighter cluster keys, and that it speeds up a little bit more towards the bottom. Okay, not what really happens. And in fact, you could take a heavy bowling ball, and if you threw it on a really hard surface like a marble floor, polished concrete floor, if the bowling ball didn't crack, it actually would bounce really high, unexpectedly so, because it would spring up and it would bounce quite brightly. It would look very similar to a bouncing ball, except it wouldn't be deforming the way we're going to have the bouncing ball deform later. So reality isn't really what we're going for here. We're doing what the audience expects. And so I want them to know that this is a heavy ball. And so I'm going to do all sorts of little tricks to try and make it look heavy. I'm going to grab this key here, pull it over a bit, grab this handle, and I'm just making those rounded parabola shapes like this and like that. And you'll notice I only have one bounce, and then it's just rolling. And that is also going to help it make the ball feel really heavy. Now, I want it to look visually even. And this is one of the tricky things. On a bounce on a level surface, the number of frames to the top is the same as the number of frames down. So if I went like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So if I were bouncing on a level surface, it would be 17 frames to the bottom. And I'm just doing this by holding down the Alt key, and that key that would allow me to step to the next key on the object I have selected. If I hold down Alt, it just steps one frame at a time. And I do this constantly where I'm stepping one frame forward and back, or a few frames forward and back, and my thumb resting on the Alt, my ring finger and middle finger resting on the greater than, less than. So I can just sort of step back and forth like that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So if I were bouncing on a level surface, this is where that key would be. But because it's not, it's bouncing up here, I want that curve to be sort of similar shape, but disrupted. And I'll show you how I can kind of visualize that a little more easily. I'm going to use a tool called buffer curves. So I'm going to say, first, I want to see those buffer curves. So I'm going to say view, show buffer curves. There we go. I'm going to turn that on. And I'm going to take a buffer curve snapshot. So it's these two little things here. This one here says, hey, take a snapshot. So now if I move this key around, you can see this dark gray line showing where it was before. And I can use that as a visual guide to sort of say, hey, so I'm just going to follow that. So the shape of that curve is the same. And that's going to keep those properties feeling consistent. So that's a sort of a cheeky little trick to kind of help guide you. Okay, so there we go. I've got the translate Y, boom, boom, boom. And let me see here, the sound effects definitely help. I'm just going to check this one here. There's my contact frame. And I'm just going to go like this. And you can see I'm also doing something a little cheeky here. I'm intersecting the surface that it's bouncing on a little bit more than I was with the rubber ball. It just goes by in one frame, but it kind of just helps it feel a little heavier, like it's denting the ground that it's landing on. Just another little fun trick that I'm going to use to kind of make this thing look heavier. So there it dents the ground that it lands on. Play around. There we go. And then here, it's just going to land on the surface. I'm just going to pull it up a little bit so it's sitting perfectly on the surface there. Pull that handle down. I don't want it too square at the top. I just want it sort of looking a little bit more flat, a little bit more rounded. And go here like this. You can see as I manipulate that tangent handle, the shape of that curve changes. See how it gets a little rounder. If I go like this, it's a little more triangular. And it's tricky. Something like this, too triangular, it starts to look wrong. Something like this, it's too flat, it starts to look wrong. It's a really fine line, and you can actually get more nuanced control by moving further out from the key, and so it takes less movement. And I'm just holding down the middle mouse button and shifting like that. And in fact, I can even go like this. I can go way out like this and go to get that little manipulation. So yeah, that feels about right. Checking my translate Z, feels about right. Let's see what we got. Now, once the ball hits and it's rolling, it is going to lose energy as it's rolling along the ground. Friction interaction with that ground is going to slow it down a little bit more each frame. And so after the bounce, right here, this little bounce here, I'm going to go ahead and put a key on the translate Z, key selected. And then in my graph curve, I am going to go ahead and after that key, start to slow it down. So I'm going to take this key here, I'm going to pull it down just a teensy little bit. And you can see that buffer curve showing me what I had before. I'm going to take this key, I'm just going to go like this and just give it a slight curve like this. I'm going to break this tangent handle. I'm going to say, so then you like this. And then this key here, I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, flatten that handle. I'm going to pull you up just a little bit like that. And so you can see if it moved at a steady speed, this is where it would end up. But I'm going to have it just ever so slightly starting to slow down. And I'm not going to have it come to a complete stop by the end of the scene. I'm just going to go like that so that I can see it's decelerating. It's losing speed coming to a stop that we can see eventually it would come to a stop. And so we get this slow rollout with slowing down more and more and more, but it takes the entire scene. It's just going along. So let's see how that looks. I'm going to go like this. Let me go show, turn off those NURBS curves, turn off those motion trails, and I'm just going to hit play. So let's see, heavy ball. Too slow, too slow. Way too much hang time. I'm going to speed that up. And I think I'm going to reduce the height of that bounce as well. It feels a little too high. So let's go into the graph curve here. And let's go like this. I'm going to say too slow. I have two options. If something is too slow, I can either reduce the number of frames where the action happens, and fewer frames mean it happens more quickly, or I can increase the distance it travels. Now, let's say that I'm happy with the height, the relative height of the bounce, that I'm like, no, when it falls, I want it to bounce that high. Then my only option is to reduce the number of frames. So I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to say, hey, let's take these keys here. Let's go like this. I'm going to go, let's reduce it by 1, 2, 3, and let's reduce this half here. Move him by 1, and then this one here. 1, 2, 3, and then this one here. Let's reduce the frame on either side. 1, 1. And now I'll have to adjust my tangent handles because by moving those keys close together, you can see my curve got a little more triangular. So I'm going to round that out again, pull those tangent handles up. And this is actually where weighted tangents would have given me a slightly better result, because as I move those keys together, the impact on the shape of the curve would be not as significant. Those weighted tangents would sort of manage that transition a little bit better. Let's see how that looks for timing. And again, I can check my timing because I know I've set my playback to 24 FPS times 1. So let's see how that looks now. Boom, boom, boom. Still too slow on that first bounce. This first bounce here, too slow. So let's go ahead and move those keys. And I can just do this on the timeline. Mouse button, click and drag. 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to go ahead and take my my slider here. This is sort of the a subset of my timeline, so I can isolate the section I'm actually interested in. Still a little too slow. Let's speed that up even more. 1, 2, 1, 2. And let's take this and move it out just a bit more so it's an even slower rollout. Still a little too slow. But I think I'll also slow that bit down. So this first bounce. Let's see. This moment here, I want it contacting the side like that. So I'm just adjusting my curve. And this moment here, I'm just going to pull it a little bit further out like that. Let me check my graph curve now. Check my translate Z. Linear, handle, linear there, linear there. Let's see, that's looking a bit better. He looks like he loses a bit too much speed here though, so I'm just gonna pull this over a bit like this. Pull this handle down a bit like that. And like this. There we go. And as you get more comfortable and familiar with graph curves, you can kind of quickly see just by manipulating that key how it's going to affect the motion. I'm going to break this handle here. There we go. There we go. Let's see what that looks like. That's a bit better. This first bounce is still a little too slow. So I'm just going to go like this. 1, 1, 2, 3. Let's try that. That's too fast. 1, go. And then a little bit of tangent handle work. So big, heavy ball. Loses tons of energy. I think maybe I'll take this apex key and I'm just going to move it down a little bit here. And this one, same thing. I'm going to move it down just a teensy bit, see if it loses more energy that way. Yeah, that's better. And now let me grab graph curve here, translate Y, pull this handle up just a bit more. F to frame, focus up the curve. You can see my old buffer curve here. I've sped this animation up significantly from what it was initially to get that right feel. And truthfully, it's pretty hard to do this except without sort of make a change, see how it feels. I'm just doing a little bit of adjustment to set my apex on that half frame. This one here, I'm just gonna hold that. It's getting a little too flat at the top there. Let's see how that looks now. There we go. That's starting to feel more like a heavy ball. Might be a little too long, but let's compare the two now. I'm going to go like this and open up my reference editor and bring in my rubber ball now. And let's hit play with the both of them. You'll see the difference between the two balls. And hopefully the physical difference between them is really evident. That one is, going down to the ground really hard, doesn't recoil very much, has a lot of inertia. Now it feels like it speeds up here after the deflection. And so I just need to adjust that graph curve a little bit on that. Now, I don't have my controllers visible, but let me show you something here. It's kind of handy. Here's my rubber ball controller, main control A, main control, that's the B one. I can go here to my script editor in this lower right-hand corner here. And whenever I click something, so if, for example, I click in the empty space here, you'll see it spits out this little command, select -CL, which is Maya's language MEL for deselect everything. And if I click on this controller here, it says, hey, select -R A main control. If I grab this little bit of line here, just left mouse button, click and drag, and I drag it up onto the shelf, and it says, hey, is this Mel you just dragged up here? And I say, yeah, it's Mel. Now I have a button that if I click it, it selects that controller. So click, grabs that controller. It basically says, hey, deselect everything and then grab this object. I'm going to do the same thing with this one here. I'm going to say, grab that ball and move it here. Mel. And so let me edit it here. This one I'm going to say, I'm going to give it a name of icon label A. Save all shelves and edit. This one here, I'm going to give an icon label of B. Save all shelves. So again, I'm just sort of building some little tools for myself to speed up my workflow that if I want to select this ball, I just click B. If I want to select the other one, I click A. And I don't have to actually see the control to do this. I can turn those controls off. I click A. I've got the A ball selected. I can see it. B, I've got the B ball selected. I can see it. And so I'm just going to make a little adjustment here because you can see, yeah, he's sort of slowing down too much. See how he suddenly looks like he puts on the brakes? So I'm going to go like this. I'm going to grab this key and pull it down so it's moving faster, which is going to change where it bounces here. And I'm going to grab this other key here. Let me just pull it up a little bit like that. And I'm actually going to just get rid of that key entirely for a second. Pull this one here like this, pull this down like that. There we go. And then this one here, I'm going to have it deflect off a little bit more. Let's see, so bounce, bounce, bounce. And here, let me flatten this and out a bit because it feels like it's recoiling with more energy than it's hitting the wall. And so if I go here like this, it's a little tricky to see. But if I go, on this frame here, 8.259, 8.7, I'm just sort of looking at how much energy it hits with. So 8.259, it hits the wall. The next frame, it should be kind of close to 8.259. That basically in one frame, it travels almost the same distance, maybe slightly less, because it's lost some energy. But that is going to give me a good starting energy so that it doesn't feel like it suddenly hits the wall and has more energy than when it left. And then slows down over the course of the animation, just rolling to a stop. And I'll go like this. I'm going to take this key right to the end of the scene here, pull it down like this, a little bit further. And because he's sort of running into him there, I'm just going to like translate that ball. Let's see, I don't know, -2, like that, just so he's behind. There we go. So the two balls aren't on top of each other. There we go. So there's my heavy ball. Pretty easy, pretty quick. But you can see a really distinct difference in the physical properties of the two balls. Makes them really evident. Which one's the heavy ball, which one's the rubber bouncy ball. I am going to bring the balloon in next because this one is really tricky. There are a bunch of things we're going to do in the graph curve to get the visual look of it feeling right. And so for my balloon, let's see here. He's going like that. I want him to start. Let's see, just trying to think where I put everybody. Be nice to have the balloon sort of filling up this space here when everything's there. I'm just trying to think where my audience is looking at each moment. So here that bounces up, guides my eye to there. He starts there. And so we're sort of, this would be the moment where it'd make the most sense for the balloon to start. And if the balloon started sort of here and like maybe did like something where he bounces off this corner and back down into the space so that he ends up, sort of somewhere in here. Just thinking about how I'm guiding my audience's attention. Yeah, so if those two balls are sort of separated, that we can see who's who, that's the perfect moment for the balloon to start. So I'm going to go like this, File, Reference Editor, or I can just click on my window there, say, okay, where's my balloon? There it is. I'm going to say, Show Nerves Curves. Grab that nerve curve for a second, and I'm going to say, hey, don't show that tail. And I must click. I'm going to move that balloon to start. up into this position here. This is where the balloon is just going to be resting and starting. I'm going to make a button to select that controller, same as I did the other ones. So select -CL, select main control. And the reason I want that select -CL is just so that if I have something else selected, I want to deselect it and only grab the balloon. I'm not going to be manipulating multiple balls at the same time. So that's why I add that select -CL. A, B, C is the balloon. And I'm going to go ahead, hit S to key on frame 66 where it's going to start. And so I want that balloon to hit sort of here on the corner and then deflect off and be coming down towards the ground. You know, sort of that. Well, I wonder. Probably end up somewhere. So it would go, boing, boing, and then probably bounces up a little bit and over, and then like that. Boing, boing. So down, 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 and probably just another little bounce there and there, and it wouldn't roll very far. The balloon has almost minimal mass. Air resistance, the surface of the balloon is so great and the mass is so low that air resistance would actually have an impact on its movement. And rather than having like a beach ball or something that's potentially kind of similar to a rubber ball, I'm going for something that's really different. I want a wide gulf of difference between the physical properties of these three balls so that it's evident which one is which. And so that you're really pushing yourself to go extreme with some of your changes. Now, I'm going to go ahead and create that motion trail on this editable motion trail. I'm going to say show motion trails. And just to make my life a little easier, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to unload the other two references because I'm not interacting with them right now. I just want to be able to see my balloon clearly and not have to look at anything else. I'm going to get rid of my script editor there. So there's my balloon. I'm going to go ahead, Windows, Outliner, or I can just go here, Outliner, and I can say there's that balloon. Balloon ball, like that. And I'm going to go ahead, hit Control A, pull up, show those frame markers, go like this. Maybe I'll give it a different color. Oh, oops, I think I did frame numbers. There we go, frame crosses like this. Go nice and bright there, make them a little larger. There we go, just so I can see the spacing on that balloon. Let me go a little bit lighter. There we go. So I don't need to see my NURBS curves because I can just select the ball by clicking here. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting about this balloon is that we're going to be doing some stuff in the graph curve. Now, I've gone and I've keyed all the channels. Again, we're not using translate X, rotates, none of these, delete those. I'm going to set this to +2, like that, just so it's closer to us. So we're going to want those curving parabola shapes like we have on the rubber ball, but we want the spacing that once the balloon is falling, it suddenly air resistance equals its own mass and it starts to fall at a steady rate of speed, that gravity's pulling as hard as it can, but there's not much to grab a hold of because there's very little mass there. And so instead of accelerating towards the ground, it's going to get up to a certain speed and then it's going to fall steadily and lightly. And so my graph curves, I'm actually going to be doing some interesting things here. I'm going to go here to my graph editor. My translate Y initially is going to be sort of going slowly, easing into the fall like this. But then it's going to reach this sort of set speed and it's just going to keep falling at that rate. So I'm going to grab this one here. I'm going to break that tangent handle. But instead of it sort of being like this, you know, where it's speeding up into it, it's actually just going to fall at that steady rate like this. It becomes linear like this. Now I may need to move these curves a little bit. So let's see here. I'm going to grab this key here and say, let's move you a little closer like that. So I'm going to go like this, so that that rate of falling down sort of reaches a speed that it's just going at, and then it just falls at that same speed the entire time. But in order to keep my parabola kind of in an arc shape, I'm going to go like this. The initial movement side to side is going to be a little bit quicker, and then that energy side to side gets sapped away by air resistance. So whatever magical force sort of launches the balloon and gets it going at the start of the scene, that dissipates. Air resistance stops that from moving forward, and then it just starts to fall straight down. And it falls kind of at a steady rate of speed. That while it's initially going a little bit quicker, and I can even do something like this where my speed's kind of like that. It gets that launch off, then it just kind of falls at a steady rate of speed. And now it's going to hit this corner here, boink, and deflect off. So there's the moment it hits that corner. And I'm going to pull this. Let me break this tangent handle here. Pull this down a little bit, just get a bit more of a curving shape there. And grab this guy here, break his handles. And I'm going to say he hits that corner and kind of gets just like a little bit of a deflection up and off, not a ton, something like that initially he's not falling down much. And translate Z, again, he shoots out to the side a little bit, but then starts to fall at a steadier speed, or rather loses that side to side movement. So there's that arcing shape. I'm going to go ahead and pull this over a little bit like this so he doesn't go quite so far this side there. There we go. That he's going to go maybe like half the distance of where he started. He's not going to fall that far. These guys, I'm just going to pull them all up like that, pull it much closer together. There we go. So you can see I still have that curving shape, that parabola shape, but I'm actually getting even spacing by manipulating these handles, that more side-to-side movement initially with less later, less up and down movement initially, more later. And so he does accelerate a little bit, but then he reaches that steady speed. And then here, these curves, I'm going to pull them a little bit closer together. The bounce, similar to a bouncing ball that hits the ground, deflects off, but loses that energy quickly. Translate Y after that bounce. So bounce, translate Z. Gonna go like this, break that tangent handle here. So I can manipulate those handles separately. Like that. Keep it moving at a steady speed. And you like that. Break those tangent handles. This, like that. Translate Y, go here. This point, break that tangent handle, similar to a bouncy ball now, where I'm getting those curving shapes like this. But it's moving at a much slower pace. There we go. After that second bounce, it's just not going to have much energy left. And in fact, these little points here, it's probably going to slow down quite significantly. Get those shapes that I want. Now, going in closer, I'm just going to unlock my camera here for a second, going in closer so we can see the spacing on this. I want to have, it is a little bit faster because you see this is how fast it's moving here. So the recoil off the ground there should be, it should have some amount of energy. So I'm going to go like this and say, yeah, that initial bounce after this landing here, I want to have a bit more quick going up. So like that, you can see that spacing. And then down to here, same thing with this guy. Pull that up a little bit. Pull that up like that. Grab my translate Z. Pull him in a little bit because you can see that angle was steeper, which meant he was inexplicably going faster. Grab that handle there. Similar to a rubber ball bounce, just a bit slower. And then let's see, I'm going to just move this key out a little bit. So as I move these keys, watch the number of frame marks there. As I add frames, you'll see more frames added, and then the apex of this key here. Let's see here. Whoops. Slow Dave. There we go. There's that handle. Just pull him down a little bit. Again, this is where those weighted tangents might behave a little more friendly for me. Pull him out a little bit. There we go. That's starting to get the shape that I want. Translate Y. Pull that up just a bit more rounded shape. There we go. There we go. So you can see how the spacing is a little more even. The bounce is much slower. Let's see, translate Y, don't need that there. My keys are getting a little bit offset from each other, so you can see this contact frame here. I'm going to move my translate Z there, so the Z contact frame and that is on the same frame. This key here, I don't actually know that I need, but I'm going to go ahead and move it to the apex as well, just so it's in the same place. And I'm playing around, you can see the side-to-side movement more powerful initially, and again, that air resistance kind of creates this asymmetrical shape where that energy bleeds off. See, I'm going to unify that. I'm going to go and unify these tangent handles here. There we go. Unify those tangent handles. Flatten. Get that shape looking a little better there. Get that shape looking a little better there. There we go. Let's see how that looks. So let me get back to my original composition here. And this is one of the reasons I created that ground plane, is so it gave me a visual point of reference of what my framing should start like. There we go. So there at 65, the balloon starts, bounces, very light. And maybe I'll just do a teeny bit of movement there, so it's just sort of like moving along on a breath of air, you know, just some little remnant of energy getting it to roll out. But truthfully, I think I'm going to have him come to a stop much sooner. So he'd roll a teensy bit out, but for the most part, wouldn't get very far. Just want that nice sort of gentle roll out there like that. Unlike the heavy ball, which takes a long time to come to stop, the balloon is very little keeping it going. I'm going to go ahead and turn off those motion trails now, and let's see what that balloon looks like. So, boom, boom. And you know what? I could probably slow the entire thing down and get an even better feel. So I'm going to go like this, grab my C, and I'm just going to grab wholesale my entire curve, move it out 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe start it just a couple frames sooner. And remember how I warned, I'm going to have to do snap to get those onto whole frames. There we go. That's starting to feel more balloon-like. Maybe even a couple more frames. I'm just going to go left mouse button, shift, click, and drag. Pull this out, start it just a couple of frames sooner. And let's see. Now I'm having trouble scaling there, so I'm just going to go like this, 160. Pull this range out for a second so I can select and scale this out like that, and then right click and go snap. There we go. So that takes me just beyond the end of the frame. I'm going to grab that and move it back one frame there. There we go. Let's get rid of that. There we go. And then back to 144 like that. Get me back to my original. There we go. Okay. Let's see here. I'm going to isolate starting at frame 61. Play that. Boom, 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 boom. There. Feels like it might put the brakes on this side-to-side movement just a little bit too quick here at the beginning. So I might tweak that just a teensy bit. Let's see, translate the. See, pull this down just a teensy bit more. Teensy bit more. There we go. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, there we go. Nice and easy. And that is the balloon. So all three balls together now. 1, 2, 3. There we go. So hopefully somebody coming along and seeing this animation with no context, no information, would be able to go, okay, can you pick out which one's the rubber ball? Which one's the heavy sort of cannonball? Which one's the balloon? Hopefully it's pretty evident by looking at them, which one's which. The last thing that I want to demonstrate is how we deal with the squash and stretch of the rubber ball. The heavy ball, very rigid, doesn't deform much. The balloon, there's going to be a little bit of deformation. I'll show you that after I've done the rubber ball. And the squash and stretch controller is going to feature here. So let me show the NURBS curves for a second. When I select that main control, I'm going to turn on that squash and stretch controller right here, show squash. And you'll have to have NURBS surfaces visible. And it's very hard to see. You can see sort of there's the main control, and then there's that squash and stretch control right next to it, the squash control right there. I'm a big fan of creating a button to also select that squash control to make it much easier. So I'm going to go to my script editor here, and you can see here's that command, select my a squash. I'm going to go ahead and go like this. I'm going to copy that command. I'm just going to go Control C to copy. And so now that I've got it selected here, you can see if I go like this, Control V to paste, there's that command. I'm going to add this, selecting the squash control to my button. So I'm just going to go here like this, and I'm going to say edit that button, right click and edit. And on the double click, I'm just going to paste that command. So now on my shelf button, if I single click it, I grab the main control. If I double click it, I'm grabbing the squash and stretch control. And in fact, I can easily use that command there and just change this A colon, change that to a capital B, and that'll apply to him. Save all shelves. Same thing with this one. If I go to my C character, paste it, and I just go, okay, change that capital A to a capital C. There. Now I've got a button for every one of my characters to select the squash and stretch controller. One click, I select the main controller. Double click, I select the squash and stretch controller. Click, main controller, double click, I've got the squash and stretch controller. Even though it's not visible on this character, if I single click, you can see I have show squash turned off, but I can still select it. And that's super handy because now I can just go ahead and say, you know what, A ball, even though I'm going to be using the squash and control, I'm not going to bother showing it. I'm going to turn it off. Now, I will show it as I'm animating the demonstration because I want to show to you how I'm going to be rotating that squash and stretch controller is an important part of it there. So you'll need to see that squash and stretch controller. And here I'm just changing my background color with Alt B so you can see that squash and stretch controller as I select it. There it is. Okay, the rubber ball is going to be the most of the managing of the squash and stretch. There's going to be a bunch of work there. And so you can see I created my buttons to select that squash and stretch control just by double clicking. I'm also going to go ahead and in my reference editor, I'm going to unload the other two characters because I'm not dealing with them right now. Whenever possible, I try and do that. I'm going to go Alt B. Oh, whoops, or Alt B, there we go. And there's sort of a nice visual. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my resolution gate. And let me move my zoom controls out of the way here. So double click to select that squash and stretch controller. And the two channels that we're going to be animating on the squash and stretch controller, not surprisingly, the squash channel, I'm going to go ahead and S to key that, and the rotate X. Those are the two channels that we're going to be using. Now for this, having the motion trail visible is also going to be super helpful. And that reason will become evident as I go along. The first thing to understand about the squash and stretch is the idea that at the moment the ball is moving at its fastest, this last frame before it hits, that's where it's stretching. When it contacts a surface, that's where you'll see that squash. And then on the next frame immediately after, that's where you're going to see that big stretch. Now the stretch will diminish as it slows down. So somewhere mid-span on the bounce and somewhere mid-span here, it will still be perfectly round. It only stretches just as it approaches the ground and just after it leaves the ground. Okay, so when you think of squash and stretch, think of it really as stretch, squash, stretch. They're one frame apart. It doesn't start squashing before it hits the ground. Probably one of the most common errors I see when manipulating this squash and stretch, which means when you select that squash and stretch controller, you should see something like this, where there is a key here, here, and here, like that. 3 keys all together, and then a little ways up, maybe 2 or 3 frames, a key like that, and a key like that. Okay, so those are the sort of the keys that you'd expect for that squash and stretch, is 3 clustered together. Let's start with the easy one, the squash. In the negative frame range, you can see it squashes. In the positive frame range, it stretches. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn off NURBS curves so we can see the squash and stretch control by itself. So there's that squash. And if you need more granular control, I'm just doing this by clicking on the word squash and then middlemost dragging back and forth in the viewport. And if I hold down Control while I do it, it moves less for the same movement. So it gives you sort of more refined control. So there we go. I'm going to set it to like 0.27 for that squash. The bigger the distance that it's bouncing, obviously, the bigger the squash. The faster it's moving, the bigger the stretch. And so there's my squash. And then I'm going to go here and I'm going to do a stretch. And again, I'm holding down the Control key to give me, more refined control. Let's do like 0.27. And here, I'm going to stretch just slightly less. Let's do 0.2. The big thing here, and this is important because this is another one of those really common mistakes with squashing and stretching. The ball stretches along its path of travel. And the path of travel, it's being depicted by this motion trail right now. So if I take my rotate X and I rotate so that that stretch, the long axis of the stretch is pointing along the path, and then I go here and I rotate it in the opposite direction like that. And so now you can see stretch, squash, stretch like that. Now I am going to have to adjust my graph editor here because you can see by squashing it, he's no longer contacting the ground. So if I go like this, click to grab my main control, graph editor, and just go to my translate Y, and I'm just going to do a shift and middlemost drag down, and there we go. Get it back in contact. And if I'm having trouble getting granular control, just zoom in closer on that key there. And I'm doing that by Alt, Shift, and right mouse button allows me to scale my view of the curve. Alt, Shift, right mouse button held down, you'll see that question mark saying, which way do you want to scale your view? I get nice and close, and then I can tweak that so it's just in contact, like that. So there we go. Stretch, squash, stretch. Now there is that other key that I have to get to, so let me go like this. Double click to grab my squash and stretch controller, less than symbol to get to my next key. This one here, no squash, it's perfectly round, but I am going to rotate it so that if it were stretching, it's sort of perpendicular to the path of travel. So you can see I'm making that sort of at a right angle so that as it starts to stretch, it stays facing along that path. If I left this here at 0, watch what happens. It starts to stretch and the axis of the stretch is slightly off the path of travel. So that's why even though it's round here, I'm going to rotate that controller so it's perpendicular to the path of travel. It's making that right angle. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to rotate it so it's perpendicular to the path of travel. Now, this is the fun thing about CG animation. Now that I've done one squash and stretch right here, I can copy that and paste it to another bounce. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So with my squash and stretch control selected, so double click, there's my squash controller. I'm going to left mouse button and shift and select those keys. And then I'm going to right click and I'm going to say copy. Now I'm going to go here where it's bouncing. And you can see the squash here, if I go back 1, 2, 3, 4 frames from the contact point, that's where I want to paste that animation. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, 4. I right click on the timeline and I go paste and paste. And now it will take that data and paste it on the same spot. And if you look in the graph curve, you can see there's what that looks like. So let me undo that for a second. And now I'm going to go right click, paste, and paste. And now boom, it puts it there. And then I can go to the next bounce here and count back 1, 2, 3, 4, and go paste again. And there we go. And then I can go to the next bounce here. So there's that contact frame and go back 1, 2, 3, 4, right click, paste. And then I'm going to go to the next contact here. 1, 2, 3, 4, paste, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm not going to use these exactly as they are because the squash and stretch should be a function of how fast that character is traveling. So here I'm going to go again back 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to go paste. And you'll notice there's also a problem. He's traveling in the opposite direction now. So when I paste, the rotations aren't correct. But I can go and edit those. I can fix those very easily. I'm just placing the squash and stretch in there initially just to get me something in place. So I'm going to go back 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to go right here, paste, 1, 2, and there's that squash. And then go here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and again, paste. Now it's also becoming a problem because my bounces are getting closer than 4 frames apart. But having those keys in place is just going to speed up the process for me a little bit. 1, 2, 3. Now here's the challenge. It's like the apex is 3 frames away, so I can't really paste this anymore. I could go like this. I could go paste like this, and then just grab these keys and say, hey, move back 1 frame to get it into the right position. And there we go. So now I've quickly reproduced that squash and stretch on every single bounce. Now I can go back and I can edit it. So for example, this one here, just as I had to open up the graph curve and adjust it so that it wasn't quite so extreme, I can also scale down how much it's squashing and stretching. So there's that squash and stretch channel right there. When I click on the name, you'll see the squash and stretch. And I can just take this bit and I can say, hey, you know what? I want less of this. So if I put my mouse here and I hit R and scale, you'll see those keys shrink down. But if I put my mouse cursor here and I do this, it pulls them up. So it's very easy to kind of mess it up when you're using scaling. So instead, I'm going to use a little math function. This is a fairly easy one. I'm going to select all of the keys that I'm interested in, and in the stats box here of the graph curve, the first number is what frame a key is at. The second number is the value of that key. I'm going to go ahead and say, for example, this key here is at 41. It has a value of 0.27. I want to change those values so that they're less. So I'm going to select all of those keys of the squash and stretch, and I'm going to say in the value channel, I'm going to do a little math function called asterisk equals, and I'm going to say 0.9, which is basically saying I want to have 90% of whatever the value of those keys is. So the keys that are 0, 90% of 0, 0, nothing changes. The keys above and below, whether they're in negatives or positive ranges, it will just be slightly less. And so when I hit, and I'm going to do 0.8, let's do a more significant change. Watch that curve when I hit enter. Boom, it squashes down. And you can see the buffer curve is there. So I can see what I had before. And in fact, this here says take a buffer curve snapshot. This here says, hey, swap with what I had before. So this is what I had before. And after that math function, that's what I have after. And so this next one, I want to do even more. I'm going to say, I don't know, asterisk equals 0.6, even less, because it's a smaller bounce. And then this one here, I'm going to say, I don't know, maybe half of that. So I'm going to say asterisk equals 0.5. And whoops, did it work? No, I didn't think I did it right. Let me try that again. Asterisk equals 0.5. There we go. And you can do the same thing, like, for example, if I had a bigger bounce, I could say asterisk equals 2. Give me twice as much as I currently have. Now, in this case, the math function will take it exactly to where it was originally. So you can increase or decrease mathematically so that it's evenly scaling. So it's pretty handy. I can do it on a wholesale set of keys. Like I can go here, grab all of these later ones and say, hey, you know what? I definitely want them at least half as much. So I'm going to say asterisk equals 0.5. And then I can scale them down further from there. So I can say, you know, U3, in fact, I'm going to do this. I'm going to show you a fun little trick. Let's see. On this one here, I'm going to go asterisk equals 0.6. So give me a third, but I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to select that bit of text and go Control C to copy it. And then I'm going to enter. And now I just sort of grab the next one and go Control V to paste, enter, Control V to paste, enter. And so now each one I've scaled down to 2/3 of what it was previously. And as I shuttle along now, perfect. So I've fixed the squash and stretch. Now I just have to fix the rotational information. And that's a much easier one because these bounces, as I said before, each one is sort of looking like it's related to the others, which means the angle that it leaves the ground there is pretty similar on each of these bounces. All I need to do is do like a little bit of tweak on this curve to change the angle it's heading on here. And I'm pretty much where I need to be. This one here looks pretty good. This one here looks pretty good. That one here looks pretty good. This is where I get into trouble, is here he's rotating in the opposite direction that I need. Now, the fun thing is, for this whole section where from like frame 105, sorry, I have a little unwanted assistant, from 105 to 121, all of those keys are in the opposite direction where I want to be. So I'm going to say like this, 105 to 120, try that again, asterisk equals -1, which means take whatever you've got right now, give me the opposite, invert that curve, and boom, now it's angled in the correct direction. So those little value operators, as they're called, those little math functions that we do, they can be incredibly useful for this kind of thing. Now these guys here, I don't need those keys at all. From this point on, it can be at 0. So I'm going to just take those last two and I'm going to say in the value field, 0. Whoops, I'm moving too quick for Maya. 0, enter, there we go. Just 0 out those keys. There we go. And so now I got my squash and stretch. And let me go ahead and hide that motion trail, or turn off motion trails. And let me go ahead and I'm going to select the main control of that character and say, okay, I don't need to see the squash and stretch anymore. And let's hit play. And you should see. Now it moves by fairly quickly. Those squashes are pretty percussive, pretty quick. You know, they go by fast. This moment here, oh, I do need to fix my contact frame. So click on that A there, translate Y, frame him up. Let's see there. Yeah, whoops. And let's see, pull that down just a teensy bit. E shift, there we go. There's my contact frame there. This one here, contact's good. This one here, contact is just a little off. Pull that down a little bit. This one here. Oh, and this was the other place that I needed to make a slight adjustment. Double click there for a sec. Because he's hitting an angled surface, at that moment that he has the contact frame, I actually want him to be perpendicular to the surface he's striking. So ordinarily it's horizontal because the ground is horizontal. But whenever we hit that angled surface like that, I want to make sure that I have that angle. And let me turn on my motion trails for a second and just make sure that my angles are correct, because this doesn't quite look right. I'm going to get in a little closer here for a second. Let's see. So coming in for the landing, yeah, you know what? He's off a little bit. There we go. That's the angle he should be at. And then this one here, again, more of an angle. There. And then this one here, again, more of an angle, because I'd forgotten those curves were sort of shallower. This one, more of an angle, following the path of travel. This one here, more of an angle. And you can see I'm sort of laying the blue line as I rotate it along that axis. This one here, more of an angle. Because if that squash and stretch isn't correctly along the tangent, this one here should be at an angle of 0 because he's hitting horizontal surface. This one here, again, more of an angle because these bounces are real shallow now. This one here, technically he's hitting this perpendicular surface, although I'm not deforming him on that surface. Although I guess I probably should have a teeny little bit squash and stretch. There we go. Well, except I think squash is in the negative range, so he actually squashes this way, which means I need to rotate him this way. There we go. So there's that. This one here, rotate him so he's on the proper path. There we go, and squash 0 there. This one here, rotating. And it's tiny little differences, but it makes a huge impact on the sort of the quality of the movement of the character, having it squashing in the right direction. So here, like that. Here again, following the path of travel with that squash and stretch. This one here, same thing. There we go. And there we go. All right. So there we go. There's my squash and stretch. All my contacts are worked out. Let me check my resolution gate here, get my composition framed up back the way I wanted it. There we go. There we go. Beautiful. Beautiful. Now the squash and stretch, it sort of serves a couple of purposes. One, it's kind of mimicking the physical deformation that actually happens with a rubber ball, but it's also kind of mimicking motion blur. That it's creating that kind of strobing effect that happens in film when an object is moving quickly. And so the two things together help create the illusion of this, sort of fast moving, deforming object. It helps the audience's eye follow it. All sorts of good things going on there. Let's see, make sure that squash and stretch control is at the right angle on that frame. Yeah, it's a little off there. There we go, that's better. I'm gonna say I could see something was off. That's the squash and stretch for the rubber ball. The balloon is much easier. I'm gonna go like this, File, Reference Editor, and I'm gonna turn on the balloon for a second. Well, actually, the heavy ball is the easiest because it doesn't deform. We don't do anything in the squash and stretch. The balloon, all I'm going to do with the squash and stretch of it is I'm going to just have it squash for one frame when it contacts. So I'm going to go like this and say S key here, and I'm going to do a little bit of a squash like that. And then on either side, it immediately returns to perfectly round. So it creates this sort of feeling of a little percussive sort of pulse that the balloon is very soft, it deforms very easily. And same thing as the others, I want it perpendicular to the surface that it's touching. So, it's hitting this, so it's perpendicular on that squash. And I can also, do the same thing in terms of, oh, whoops, I forgot. I got to key that, S key there, and here, zero it out, and here as well, zero it out. And then here on this frame, again, just a teeny little squash. I'm not going to do a ton, just a little bit, perfectly round here, perfectly round here. But for those larger bounces, it gives this nice little just boink kind of feeling that's sort of appealing. You know what, I'm going to copy that here as well, copy, and I'm going to go to this contact, so one frame back, paste. There's that little boink. I'm not going to do it for this one. And in fact, this one here, I'm probably going to reduce how much it's squashing and stretching just a little bit. So it's just a teeny little squash and stretch, barely perceptible. Like, yeah, 0.04, that's plenty. 0.09. Yeah, 0.11, that seems all right. And then let me fix my contact points, because you can see now, because I squashed the character, see how that contact is not quite in contact. Go to the graph editor and translate Z, actually I'll do it on the translate Y, frame that up. Just pull that down just a tiny bit, there we go. And same with this one here, go to my next contact point here. There we go. Oh, actually, okay, that one's all right. This one here, just pull it down just a teensy bit, frame it up. There we go. There we go. Just a teeny little sort of shape change there to play around with it. Now, truthfully, there's all sorts of fun things you can do. Like, for example, if you have squash here and one frame is stretch and then perfectly round, sometimes it gives this an even bigger pulse. But typically, I find just a single frame of squash on the contact frame. It's all you need. You don't really need anything else. And that is the squash and stretch, basically. Whoops, show NURBS curves, show NURBS surfaces. Let's get back to our composition here. That is the whole kit and caboodle. That's the entire bouncing ball assignment in a nutshell. Let me get my composition back to the way I want it. Now remember, my Playblast display I had already set so that it would hide the things I don't want my audience to see, regardless of what I have in my viewport. I'm going to get my framing set up like that and lock my camera, and then I can turn off that resolution gate. And I'm going to go ahead and Playblast. Now, I have it set up to render off screen, but I'll render on screen so you can see what's happening here. I'm going to go Playblast, and I'm making sure my naming on the file is correct. And I'm going to say, yeah, overwrite that. And because these are very light rigs, of course, it renders pretty quickly. So there's my rubber ball with the squash and stretch, heavy ball, and there's my balloon. Easy peasy. There's not a whole lot to it. Hopefully, if you take advantage of the workflow efficiencies I showed you, making those tools to quickly pull up the windows you need, making those tools to quickly select the controllers that you need so you're not sort of faffing around and looking for them, makes a huge difference in how easily the assignment goes. Using those value operators in the graph curve is very handy. Tons of useful stuff there. We will probably never animate bouncing balls again after this assignment. However, there will be hundreds of instances for your entire career as an animator, if you're working in this field, where you're animating things that have the properties of a bouncing ball, because any mass moving through space, leaping, jumping, things like that, it's simply a bouncing ball. It's simply mass moving through space. It has set properties and gravity is affecting it. And good, believable physics, being able to depict them well, is a key capability of any professional working animator. And so this will come back again. Now, the other purpose of this assignment is to get you, again, more comfortable and more proficient working within the graph editor, seeing how those curves translate to the movement that you're seeing on screen. Because unlike drawn animation, where you have to literally draw every single bit of movement that you need, 12 drawings for every 24 frames held on twos, in this case, a handful of keys and a bit of graph curve manipulation, we can get really complex motion very, very quickly. This would have taken a long time to animate drawn by hand. Obviously, I did it over the course of a demonstration in class whilst I was talking and showing the tools and things like that. If I was just sitting down to animate this, this would be a 1-hour exercise. And you'll be surprised once we're finished here how quickly you could do it as well once you get comfortable. So it seems a little overwhelming at first, especially if you're not comfortable, familiar with Maya. But as you get more confident, you'll be astounded at how much time we had to actually do this. So that is it. That is the whole thing in a nutshell. I can't emphasize this enough. Please don't duplicate either the plan that I showed you here today in this version or the plan that I show on the blog. Create your own version of this assignment, because to simply copy what I'm doing, A, it wouldn't teach you very much, and B, it would be an academic integrity violation. You're not allowed to do that. Have a great day, everybody, and enjoy your weekend.